Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. Let's talk boxing. A big fight this weekend with global ramifications because the winner of the rematch between Liam Smith and Chris Eubank Jr. is likely to get a middleweight title shot. Now, I'm going to be uploading the technical breakdown and preview video for Friday night if you're in the UK or Europe. This video should be going up for Friday morning if you're in those time zones. And this one is more of a psychological deep dive into some of the tactics that have been used by Liam Smith in mental warfare. And I think he's been very, very successful at it. I know there's an awful lot of people that like to dismiss these sorts of things, ignore the weigh-in, ignore the face-offs. All that matters is what happens in the ring. And of course, that's true. But what happens in the build-up to a fight can affect what happens in the ring. There have been many great fighters of the past that have spoken about psychological warfare as being central to their success. So we're going to talk about some of the things that Liam Smith did here and where I think he's been very effective. First and foremost, you have to understand that Chris Eubank Jr. is in uncharted territory, psychologically and emotionally speaking. He's had a very challenging couple of years. First and foremost, he lost his beloved brother Sebastian in tragic circumstances. And when you lose somebody in a premature way, obviously the pain of that is overwhelming. But in addition to that, Sebastian had a son called Raheem, and Chris Eubank Jr. has spoken about the fact that he's taken on fatherly responsibilities. And this can change a man because it can soften you. Now you have other priorities in life. A lot of fighters are so focused on winning that they often use the phrase, "I'm willing to die in the ring." Now, Chris Eubank, in an interview with Gary Neville on The Overlap, which you can find on YouTube, was saying that prior to the death of Sebastian, mortality wasn't even something that ever crossed their minds. He just assumed, listen, we're all going to die, old ages, in our beds. It's something that you expect to see in movies, not to happen to you in real life. So he's basically admitting there that he's had to try to come to terms with the concept of mortality, and it's those things that can change you. And in the backdrop of that, you've also seen what seems to be a schism between him and his father's relationship. On top of that, you also had the real up and down saga with Conor Benn. There was a big money fight there to be had, real pressure, high pressure fight. If he does have these new familial responsibilities, he could certainly do with the bag. He's reaching the twilight of his career, right? Well, that was thrown to the scrap heap of history potentially with Conor Benn failing the drugs test. Eubank also put his body through physical trauma, trying to make the weight at 157, then putting on a bit of weight, having to come back down to 160 to fight Liam Smith. Many feel that that is what caused him to lose his punch resistance. But then you saw him get absolutely decimated in the ring, and this man had what seemed to be an impenetrable chin at both middleweight and super middleweight, and now he's fighting a guy coming up from 154, and it's had this effect on him. Psychologically, emotionally, it's been a very difficult time for Chris Eubank. Now, when you've looked at the way other fighters have approached trying to get under his skin, you look at guys like Billy Joe Saunders, like Spike O'Sullivan, like De Gale. They tried to talk at Eubank. They tried to put him down. They tried to mock him, telling him he's no good, that he's delusional. They're essentially trying to be verbally dismissive of him. And that didn't really work. Even with Billy Joe Saunders, where he lost the fight, I don't think it got to him psychologically. He was coming on strong late on in the fight. He kept coming. He simply got outboxed by a superior technical boxer at the time. You also had Avni Yildirim's approach, which was ultra aggressive. He had Turkish football fans in there that were chanting. They tried to really spook Eubank. That didn't work. George Groves' approach was interesting because he's spoken about the fact that he didn't want to approach it the way he did Carl Froch, because he felt Carl Froch had a big ego, so he wanted to get under his skin by being dismissive of his achievements. Whereas with Eubank, he felt that Chris is a guy that needed a dance partner when it came to trash talking. So he wanted to be aloof and distant and almost dismissive in the sense that I don't really care about this guy. He's not even on my level, and I'm not even going to try and tell him he's not on my level. It's just going to be like just another chat when we're at the press conference. And there's no telling whether that worked. It certainly didn't backfire because he won the fight. But Eubank kept on swinging. He was just outclassed a little bit, right? So I don't think that necessarily got under his skin. But now, like I said, there's a new context in his life. And Liam Smith is approaching these things very differently. He's decided to hold up a mirror to Chris Eubank. And he's saying, all those things that you're saying, all those contradictory things, I'm going to point them out. But I'm not going to talk at you. I'm going to ask you questions. You see, Eubank tends to be a guy that likes to speak very short lines. He can be quite monotonous sometimes in the way he delivers a particular phrase with these dramatic pauses. He always seems like he's unflustered and in control. Well, I'm going to give you the microphone and put you on a stage, and I'm going to make you point out your own contradictions. The other thing that he did was to tell Eubank essentially that I know you better than you know yourself. You cannot change, you cannot adapt. I've got your number and there's nothing you can actually do to wriggle out of this trap. In addition to that, I can conquer you in many ways. I have variety, you do not. And finally, he seeks to sow the seeds of doubt between Eubank and Bomac, because Bomac is seen as the solution. The reason he's hired a new trainer and to make changes is to find the solution to the problem. So if you undermine that solution, well, then you can start to cause trouble when it comes to the confidence he has in himself. So let's talk about this. Well, first and foremost, if you're talking about a masterclass in the way that he engaged with this, I would suggest you go and watch the Boxing News' heated virtual showdown, as they've called it, between these two guys. That's where Liam Smith really shone. And he starts off very early in the interview and he says, Liam Smith, with no injuries, beats Chris Eubank every day of the week and twice on Sunday. I said this last time. And that little line at the bottom, I said this last time, or you said that last time, has been constantly repeated throughout the build-up. What he's basically saying is, I'm a man of consistency. I know what I'm talking about. I know you better than you know yourself in terms of your strengths and weaknesses. Whereas everything you promised to do last time, which you're promising to do again, why should I take you seriously? Why should anyone take you seriously? Why do you even believe the things you're saying? Because clearly you don't know what you're talking about. I do. I've proved it. In addition to that, when Eubank is talking, Liam Smith has this smile on his face where it's almost like, I'm all ears, and he's sarcastic. You see, Eubank is acutely aware of the fact that he doesn't want it to appear as though he's had to make these dramatic changes to find a solution. So the interviewer asks him about why he's relocated to Las Vegas. And Eubank's trying to be dismissive of the severity of that. And he says, I wouldn't say I've relocated. I've always trained in Vegas, but the camp has been out there. I wanted a change of scenery and energy. And you can see that Liam Smith's always got that little smirk on his face, like, yeah, we know you're talking rubbish. There's a mockery there. And Smith then says, when Eubank implies that he knows how to beat him, you sound like you're on repeat. Everything you said the first time around, you know what it takes to beat Liam Smith. And Eubank says, I do know what it takes. And Smith asks him, he challenges him, he gives him the stage, he gives him the microphone essentially, and he's saying to him, well, why didn't you do it? At this point, you have to convince the world as to why you were unable to do something that you promised you could do. You have to convince yourself of that. You were so confident the first time around. How do you convince yourself? And Eubank says, I was doing it, I was dominating, and then what happened, happened. And Smith said, are you really drawing on that 20-second period at the end of round 3 for some confidence? Is that what you think is going to earn you this victory, that little spell? And Eubank says you were dominated for 3 rounds. Smith laughs it off and says, if that's domination, you're in a world of trouble. I only needed to touch you once and you folded. Now that is a very significant line, and I'll tell you why. Imagine you've got 2 fights, and in one fight a guy gets absolutely schooled, but he loses the fight on points. In the second fight, you've got another guy who feels that he's a superior technical boxer, but he gets taken out with a big shot. Typically speaking, the guy that got taken out with one individual shot is more likely to then turn it around in the rematch. Consider Lennox Lewis against Hassan Rahman, consider Lee Wood against Mauricio Lara. If you get schooled though, for instance, Kambosos against Devin Haney the first fight, it's very difficult for you to then turn it around. But from a psychological perspective, when you're Kambosos getting schooled, you're going to look at that and you're going to say, right, there are technical adjustments that I can make here to close the gap. I can come back at this guy and I can find solutions to those problems and I can win the fight. Whereas the guy that got knocked out, if part of his aura, his superpower, so to speak, was his durability, his granite chin, in the way it was with Chris Eubank, well, then it becomes a different issue. Because what technical adjustment can you make to improve your chin? You can try and protect that chin, but in a 12-round fight where a guy is very high level and you know you're fairly evenly matched, he's going to land sooner or later. What can you do to protect that? And Liam Smith plays on this, and he says he prides himself on his chin. His air of invincibility has cracked. He knows he can be hurt, and more importantly, he knows it's me that's done it to him. He's always been able to compete at a high level because he's tough and he's game and he's got a good chin. The next man he's in front of is the man that cracked them all. He lost that now. Chris will only know what he's like the next time he steps in the ring. How much that's played a part in the new Chris Eubank. So think about what he's doing there. He's telling him, I've taken away your superpowers. I'm the guy that did this to you so I can do it again. But more importantly, he's telling him that you don't even know whether it was a one-off bad night or whether your chin is permanently gone. This idea that it was because you were struggling to make the weight, you don't really know. Maybe you've just aged and your durability has gone. And until you get in a boxing ring with those small gloves on in a ferocious fight, you just don't know. So he's putting these doubts in his mind. He goes on to say, Liam Smith, I touched him once and he was like Bambi on ice. I was shocked how much he folded off of one uppercut, one right hook, one left hook, a little elbow in the middle of it. He's being sarcastic, right? About the elbow accusation from Eubank. He goes on after that to say, so what way can Chris come next time? Come and have a go. You're there to be nailed. Try and box with me like that again, or whatever he done last time, and he makes too many mistakes and I'll punish him. Even that little comment there, or whatever he done last time. In other words, what? You call that trying to box? He's telling him you've got no options. Whichever avenue you go down, it leads to the same cliff. You're falling off that cliff regardless. He then decides to try and target the mental strength of Chris Eubank Jr. He says, do you think you gained a few more fans on board with your little Man United trick the other day? What Liam Smith was doing is basically telling him you're a fraud. The reason you're putting on that Man United top when you're not a real football fan is blatantly because you're trying to get some support in the arena in Manchester because you're afraid of the hostile atmosphere. So when Eubank tries to flip it around and say, actually, it's you that can't handle being an away fighter, Smith says, I've been abroad more times than you. I've fought a Russian in Russia, a Mexican in Mexico. I fought Canelo in Texas and Jaime Munguia in Vegas. Besides Yildirim, have you ever fought anyone outside the UK? Again, it's a question. He's not telling him you've never fought anyone outside of Yildirim, outside of the UK. He's asking him. He's giving him the floor because that's telling him, go on then, Chris, explain yourself. Savage Dan did a really good job of not over talking. He would allow them to try and resolve things amongst each other. And that's a really good thing for an interviewer to do, I think, when an interview is not out of control and they're jumping and fighting over each other and screaming over each other, because that wasn't happening. He really allowed it to flow quite well. But he did go on to ask Liam Smith if he believes that Eubank will retire if Smith beats him. So what does Smith say? No, it'll be Bomac's fault, probably. In other words, again, it's about that mental strength. You are incapable of accepting accountability. It's always somebody else's fault. It's never your own. And that's why you can't improve, Chris. That's why you've never listened to your trainers. You think you know everything. You think everyone else at fault for something. And this is why you can't beat me. Now, when Eubank's talking about his motivations for this fight, he says there's more on the line now. There's danger in this fight. And Liam quickly interjects. And again, he gives him the platform, essentially the microphone. He says, what's on the line, Chris? In other words, what is it, retirement? Go on, put pressure on yourself. What is on the line? And Eubank actually does ignore this question and he just carries on moving on. But the point is he's trying to put him under pressure and getting him to talk himself into pressure. So Eubank decides that he's going to try and turn the tables, try to regain control. And he said, let's talk about you. What are you going to do? And Smith nonchalantly says, nothing. I can pick either the right or the left and see what comes first. I don't need to do anything. What do I need to do differently, Chris? And Eubank says, I don't know. Everyone's always asking me what I need to do. In other words, that's almost like a concession. Yeah, I just want people to stop talking about me. That's how it came across. He felt under fire. He's not used to being the one having the microphone shoved in his face. You're the one that needs to explain yourself. He's always had this air of contemptuous superiority. He doesn't have that now. So Smith then interrupts and says, you got stopped in 4 rounds. That's why people need to ask you. I didn't get stopped. I didn't get budged. I didn't go nowhere. So people need to ask you what you need to change because you're the one that got stopped in 4 rounds. So Eubank says, yeah, but do you have a preference? Do you want to tear up or? And Smith says, either or, mate. If you try to box me, you make too many errors, you'll get nailed. It depends how long you want it to last. If you try to have a tear up with me, it goes quicker than the 4th this time. Now, Eubank actually comes up with quite a nice little line here and he says, for me or for you? But then he gets topped once more when Liam Smith says, it just depends on what percentage I turn up at. I might just turn up at 60 and give you a chance this time. Mocking the 60% baby line that Chris Eubank used to use for Conor Benn and also Liam Smith. So the point is he's mocking him. He's blocking him off at every avenue. He's shutting down any attempts at a counter-attack from Eubank. There's nothing he can do. And Eubank tries to brush it all off again as that's a one-hit wonder. So Liam instantly says, one, which shot was it, Chris? Which one? Tell me which shot it was. Eubank just repeats, it was a one-hit wonder. And now obviously he's talking about the moment. it's a one-hit wonder as in a moment. But Liam's focusing on the punch because he says, was it a hook? Was it an elbow in there? And he's pointing to his own temple and smiling because that was an excuse that has been used to defend Chris Eubank, and he himself has said that that was the case. From there, you also have to consider the Bomac assault, shall we call it. You see, if Bomac is the solution, how can you undermine the solution? Well, Smith says to him, you can have Terence in your corner, it's not going to help you. If Terence had got beaten by Errol Spence, would you have hired Bomac? In other words, is this just a reactive, panicky response? At the end of the day, Amir Khan hired him for Kell Brook and he got beat and stopped. And the attack on Bomac has continued into fight week at the press conference. This is really good stuff because Eubank tells Bomac that there would be no towels in the corner because there's absolutely no way he can quit. So Liam Smith quickly asks Bomac if he's bringing a towel. And Bomac, not looking to undermine his fighter, says, listen, Chris already said no, so I don't know what you're asking me for. There's no need to ask me. So Smith uses that against Bomac. And he says, you've already lost every respect you've got for yourself then. If Chris is telling you not to bring a towel and he's telling you what to do. Your job is to do the best for your fighter. If he's telling you not to bring a towel, he's already the boss of you. Same old, same old. So with that line, he's saying that Eubank's the same old guy, never learns, thinks he's the boss of everybody, doesn't want to listen, is never going to improve. That's why he's going to get schooled again. Whilst you, Bomac, you're supposed to be this internationally renowned trainer and you're being dictated to by the fighter rather than you doing your job properly. And you can see that Bomac's got this little smile on his face, a little bit uncomfortable. But Bomac goes on to try and dismiss all this and say, all this trash talking, you're just lighting a fire under Chris Eubank's ass. At the end of the day, he's a different fighter, I'm telling you, and he's a very intelligent fighter. And Liam Smith instantly jumps on this too, and he says, you're trying to convince the British public that have seen him over a number of years that he's an intelligent fighter. You've just said something that everybody here has smirked at. You class Chris as an intelligent fighter. The one thing Chris is not is intelligent. You might have been a fit fighter, you might have had a great engine, but you've never been classed as an intelligent fighter your whole career. Bomac's been with you for what, 5 weeks? And he's trying to convince you that you're intelligent? In other words, not even Bomac knows you that well, Chris. How could he have improved you in 5 weeks? He doesn't even know what you're good at and what you're not good at. This relationship is a sham. You're not getting anything from this guy and you're not improving. And Bomac, he's going to hang you out to dry when he does lose. You see how he's sowing those seeds of doubt? Later, Calla Sauerland tries to imply that the camp in Brighton was a mistake and that it's the first time that Eubank has had a professional setup of a team going into a big fight and that he's never had that. Now, obviously, Calla is talking about the team rather than the individual. In other words, he's not trying to undermine Roy Jones Jr. He's just saying that he's got a more professional team rather than having a one-on-one situation. But Joe McNally, who's also very good at the mind games that I've spoken about in the past on this channel, he jumps at this too and he says Roy Jones is the ultimate professional. You're slandering Roy as a coach. That's terrible. So now he's acting all high and mighty because what he's ultimately saying is you're talking about one of the best fighters of all time, you know, a great guy, a trainer. He really knows his stuff about boxing and you're trying to undermine that. In other words, Chris has already had access to supreme level of knowledge and there was nothing he could do. And it's classless of you to try and pretend otherwise. Very, very smart stuff from Liam Smith and Joe McNally. Listen, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to win the fight, okay? Not at all. We're going to get to that technical breakdown tomorrow. But has he increased his chances of winning? Not just because of what happened, but the way he's played it. Chris Eubank's had a lot of trauma in his life, a lot of doubts, a lot of question marks that revolve around who he is as a fighter now and what he's capable of doing. Hasn't Liam Smith played a blinder in magnifying all those doubts and question marks? Let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.